Ari, it never rains in Autzen Stadium, but it was especially sunny Sunday morning as Oregon fans woke up to a win against Ohio State.
When I was watching the end of the Oregon game and I saw Dan Lanning shove that staffer and like running all over the place, just screaming, all in my head, I've been thinking for the last 13 hours since that game ended was quack, 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 Mr. Ducksworth. Quack, 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 Mr. Ducksworth. Andy.
Thank you, Gordon Bombay.
Yeah. You know what? I'm a 90s kid. It's never going to go away. It's part of me. By the way, studies have shown that people were the happiest they've ever been in the entire history of the world in the 90s. I don't know if you know that. It's true. Best time to be alive. But speaking of great times to be alive for Oregon, Andy, is that was a signature win for Dan Lanning. And everybody was criticizing him for the first 2 years of not winning big games and whether or not he was able, he got a lot of the same stuff that Ryan Day got.
That Kirby Smart got when he was in his first couple of years. It's when young head coaches are learning to be head coaches for the first time, they have to take their lumps sometimes.
But I feel like, I love his aggressive mentality. He's gone for it in fourth downs at times where people don't think he should. But I think that anybody who knows college football or anybody who follows this knows that Oregon was building it.
Yeah.
This is, they didn't have to win this game for me to feel this way because they have a really, really good team, regardless of whether or not they got the break at the end to beat Ohio State. Winning it, I think, solidifies that they were able to pull it off. But I kept thinking about, and I'm sure you did too, Dan Lanning's first game. And Dan Lanning's first game as Oregon's head coach was September 3rd, 2022. It was the Chick-fil-A kickoff game against Georgia, the team that he used to coach. And they lost 49-3. And they lost in a way that was worse than the score. They were not competitive.
Yeah.
And that was Dan Lanning seeing on the field what he probably already knew in his heart, the difference between what he had on his team then or what that team was when he took over and what you need to be to win a national championship. So through all the criticisms, the recruiting calls, the NIL discussions, the criticisms on fourth down, saying he's a choker in big games, all that stuff, when he screamed, he had to have let out the emotion of not just we won, but this is 2 years later, our team being on the same field with a Georgia-like team.
Yeah.
And not only competing with them and showing that they've grown, but winning. And I think that to me is the most significant thing about this.
This is proof of concept. And yes, if we go draft pick for draft pick, when all is said and done, I think we'll find that this Ohio State team they just beat is actually pretty similar to that Georgia team that Oregon got destroyed by.
No question.
And that was the goal. That was the mandate, the understanding when he got hired is we want you to make us like them.
Yeah.
And now they are.
And that's not an easy thing to do, or wasn't at the time, because them are blue bloods of the sport that are located in very advantageous areas of the country for talent accumulation. And Oregon has always had very good teams. They have become the Nike ambassador, their cool uniforms. It is a really cool program, but it never was situated in a position where it could exist in games against teams built like this Ohio State team is. Now, even though Oregon is not as talented, I think top to bottom as Ohio State is, they won. Yeah. Which means to me that they can win again.
Well, and they didn't win in a fluky way either. I mean,
they played a bad game, not a bad game.
They made mistakes.
They made mistakes. In the game. Yeah,
but Oregon was able to run the ball when it wanted to. Oregon was able to get receivers open when they wanted to. This was not a case of Ohio State suddenly just didn't show up or had some bus. No, there were times when Jordan James needed to get yards, and Oregon's line pushed Ohio State back. Josh Connerly had a great game. Josh Connerly, by the way, kind of the first big head-to-head recruiting win for Dan Lanning as Oregon's coach. Remember, he gets the job, and Josh Connerly's from the Pacific Northwest, and it's okay, we're going to get this guy, or is USC going to get him? Because Lincoln Riley just got hired at USC. Dan Lanning gets him. And you look at the way they've put this team together. Now, they are probably a little more portal-heavy than a lot of the elite teams that we talk about, but the choices they've made out of the portal, it's not just the Dillon Gabriel. It's not just, a lot of it is, we've talked about when you take guys out of the portal, sometimes you need to take guys with eligibility remaining so that they become part of your program.
Yeah.
Jordan Birch is part of Oregon's program now. He played at South Carolina, but he is an Oregon Duck now.
And he didn't even play in the game.
Yeah.
and they won.
So Tez Watkins is another one. He's part of Oregon's program now.
But Oregon is more portal heavy than some of these other teams, right? Oregon also signed the number 3 class in last year's Industry On3 rankings.
Correct.
Like,
and it's going to sign a really good one this year.
And the year before was number 7. And they're going to do it again this year. Like, Oregon is not recruiting on the same level as Georgia yet, but they are doing a good enough job of situating their roster with the baseline talent necessary to accentuate that talent through the portal, and have gotten to a point where they're winning the big-time recruiting battles in California. I think Josh Cornely Jr. is one of the examples of that. And the roster has been built in a way where this is a sustainable process for Oregon. They're situated well with NIL. I think they've done a very good job in California. The Nike uniform situation there is a very attractive thing. And like, if you've noticed, everything that Dan Lanning did after the game, how many different recruiting references in the postgame did he make? How many times did he say, this is why you come to Oregon? Like, he is still selling his place because the man has been branded in the brain by the best coach in college football on what it takes to be a successful program builder. So if you are a person, and this is part of the reason why I don't always get bogged down with wins and losses from young coaches, if you get it and you understand what it takes and what it looks like, you are in a position where you can find success. And Oregon is one of those places where I think that in this new era of transfer portal and NIL, they are probably one of the biggest beneficiaries of program assembly of anybody in the country, because there's no talent in high school in Oregon.
Yeah.
And they can still build, like before 4 years ago.
You occasionally get a Justin Herbert, but that's not this. Yeah, you've got to go out and get them.
Yeah.
And they've got a situation where they can go out and get anybody. But I also think that how you choose it, like, think about this. Dillon Gabriel could have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
He chose to go to Oregon, and Oregon chose to go get Dillon Gabriel. I think that we kind of gloss over that. And we're like, oh, he always wanted to play, idolize Marcus Mariota. It makes sense. But that still had to happen. Like, Will Stein had to be the offensive coordinator that he wanted to play for.
Mm-hmm.
And Dillon Gabriel had to be available, and Oregon had to say, you know what, you're in a good place, but their offensive coordinator just left.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to play in our offense instead.
And we spent this year too, Andy, at the beginning of the year with the fluky game against Idaho and almost losing to Boise, that we were like, well, maybe this Oregon team isn't as good as we think they are. And then you look at this result here, and we actually can say with a straight face now that Oregon's ceiling as a program this year is winning a national championship. Like, winning a national championship this season is 1,000% possible. And that, to me, is the testimony that you would need whenever you're analyzing the build that Dan Lanning has done. And personally speaking, I think that this might have like projected him. Like, if you were to do like a coaching rankings like Stu and Bruce used to do, or still do, like, Dan Lanning would probably be in my top 3 now.
Well, he's the guy. All you need to know is that every time a big job came open, his name popped up, and he's like, "No, thanks."
And I honestly, I'm a hot take guy.
Yeah.
So can I just rattle one off here?
Do it.
I'm going to do it in a nice way.
Go for it.
Dan, I'm not saying he would have left or wanted to leave, but if I could pick anybody to be the coach at a big time program, especially in the South, and one had an opening, like, that would have been my pick. I'm not saying it would have been possible or that Dan would have done it.
You're talking about Alabama, and here's the thing. When the Alabama job opened, Jimmy Sexton was the agent who represented Nick Saban, obviously. He also represents Dan Lanning. The question was asked, and Dan Lanning was like, thanks, I'm good.
Yeah. And I can understand that, because he probably is a good enough program builder to realize that this ceiling at Oregon was there, without having to maybe deal with some of the irrationality and the expectation that it happens immediately at the other. Like, I can understand why somebody would rather have the Oregon job, but I'm saying from a fit standpoint, a philosophy standpoint, an understanding of what it takes to build this, like, he is more in line with what Alabama probably needed than Kalen DeBoer.
But he's also what Oregon needed, and especially in the Big Ten now. Because you have to have that same kind of person, or you're not going to overcome Ohio State.
It's not to say that, like, I'm punting on Kalen DeBoer. I'm not, like, he's played in the national championship last year and beat Lanning head-to-head twice. Like, there's a lot of potential there at Alabama.
3 times,
Sorry, yeah. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, like, when you think about a Kirby Smart disciple that understands recruiting, has been at Georgia, and not only understands it, but is effective in doing it. That's about the,
But I
the
think
triple crown of what you're looking for in a coach. So,
I think that what makes Lanning interesting here, and what Oregon people should feel happy about, is that Lanning quickly recognized you can do all that stuff at Oregon.
yeah,
and that
also
he didn't have to leave. Like when Texas A&M opened, he didn't have to be like, well, I got to go there because that I can't do that here.
Yeah.
No, you can do that at Oregon.
Yes. So you have a coach that's one of the best young rising coaches in college football. You have a victory over Ohio State. You are the favorite in the number one team in my poll, which is more important, the AP poll.
Of course.
And you are firmly in the playoff, even with a loss to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, if and when there's a rematch. The Ducks have lost a lot of games that were pretty grueling the last few years. I will say, Andy, it's pretty good to be a Duck today.
Quack, quack.
Mr. Ducksworth.